This would explain so much about the amount of time Tolkien spends describing places. What's up, guys? I'm your teen librarian, Gina, and in March, you told me to read Here There Be Dragons by James Owen, which I enjoyed far more than I would have expected. Let's start with John, the main character, the caretaker prima of the Imaginarium Geographica. He starts the story filled with self-doubt, especially given his obvious PTSD, which at the time would have been almost universally seen as a weakness instead of an understandable disorder stemming from his service on the front lines of World War I. Added to that is the feeling that he neglected his studies with Professor Sigurdsson because of the historic nature of studying ancient languages and the lack of real-world applications, which is now turning out to have horrifying implications for two worlds. He sees himself as a failure, as do many of the people he's interacting with in the story. But there are a few who believe in him, who act as teachers and guides to help him discover the knowledge he already has and trust his own intuition. I think that the click for John is on page 191 when he's talking to the professor and Sigurdsson tells him that his fear of being too strong is what's holding him back. That, quote, "Our strengths are hidden until we choose to reveal them. When all that we have within is exposed and we may no longer blame our inadequacies for our failure." End quote. Paraphrased quote. It was paraphrased. That's when we're truly tested. And that quote really spoke to me. I know that I don't always put everything into a project because if I did and the project failed, I would take it as a failure of myself as a human being, and that's not the case. There are always things beyond our control, and when we fail, the best thing we can do is learn and move forward. When John accepts that he does have the knowledge, he does have the intelligence, he does have the strength, he's able to let go of the excuses and become the caretaker of this land. Which is not to say that he's stopped learning or growing, because the day that anyone does that, they really need to check their ego. Next, we have Jack. He's the youngest member of the group, and it shows. He doesn't understand yet that there are limits to what one person can do, and that some things shouldn't be celebrated. Jack actively scoffs at John when he admits he didn't give the assignments from Professor Sigurdsson the attention they deserved. And again, at both John and Charles, when John's PTSD is triggered at Paralon. Over the course of the story, Jack knowingly gives up parts of himself, I'm assuming related to compassion and caution, in order to strengthen the attributes he sees as superior. Confidence and decisiveness, until those attributes become arrogance and result in Nemo's death. That is Jack's moment of clarity, realizing that there are real consequences for our actions and that we're not always the ones who have to pay the price. It's an important step into adulthood. For Jack, Nemo's death curbed his reckless streak and tendency to leap into the fray in order to impress others. Charles' development is more subtle than his compatriots. He's the oldest of those from our world, and he seems steadier than the others, if somewhat more prone to violence. He doesn't seem to have a big aha moment the way that John and Jack do, but there is change. Charles felt like the most skeptical to me throughout the story. If someone was questioning something, it usually seemed to be him. But by the time he and Mr. Tumblr are sneaking into the Winter King's camp, Charles has slowly developed to the point where he's no longer holding himself back from the experience, the reality or convenience of things anymore. It was a gradual shift as opposed to the moments of clarity had by John and Jack, from what I could tell. It's entirely possible I missed something. The premise of this book is the same basic people from the real world go on an adventure in a fantasy land plot that we see in most books like this, which is great for people who know they love the genre, tropes and all, and just want more. If you're not a huge fan of this type of story, or you're looking for something a little more original, well, given the talking animals, peasant turned high king who was hidden away as an infant for his own protection, various species coming together for an epic final battle, and literal rings of power, this might not be the book for you. Until things at said epic battle go a little left of what you might be expecting. Then, when our heroes return to London at the end, they sign their names in the Geographica, and we find out that Charles is Charles Williams, Jack is C.S. Lewis, and John is J.R.R. Tolkien. And everything that was derivative of their works in this book is suddenly the inspiration for them. And I love that twist. This actually got me interested in the real-life interactions of these three authors. Yes, I did some research. Turns out they were big admirers of each other and actually pretty close. It also got me interested in reading some of Charles Williams' work, because I am not at all familiar with him, and I really want to figure out what themes of his inspired pieces of Here There Be Dragons. I think Lewis's contribution was things like the Silver Throne, the phrase son of Adam, referring to humans. From Tolkien we get the Ring of Power, and the Shadowborn, I think. And I think that Pandora's box and the idea of mortals getting their hands on these mystical objects that they don't know what to do with and causing chaos through misuse is from Williams' work, but I'm curious to find out if I'm right and what else I might have missed. There were a lot of other references to legends, mythology, fairy tales, etc., which makes perfect sense given the premise, and at the end Owen includes an author's note which explains some of the stories he referenced and how he used stories from different cultures to weave seemingly disparate characters and their stories together. I also really enjoyed the language and the syntax used. It was very classical, and with that more structured, kind of elegant flow to it, it really fit given the main characters and the time period of the story. It feels older without going overboard on descriptions and flowery language. Things move pretty quickly from scene to scene, and that really kept me engaged along with the dry wit dialogue. It actually took me a while to figure out whether or not the main characters were being sarcastic, because these were three grown men who were taking almost everything about this fantasy adventure in stride. Even the moments of disbelief were very brief. There was also a strong element of faith and coming to terms with the bad things that happen through accepting personal responsibility when applicable in order to grow, and also through belief in a greater power. Mostly it was subtle, occasionally it was really blatant, but threaded through most of the story. I'm curious about how much of that is how and what Owen chooses to write in general, or if it was influenced by the main characters of this story and how their writing impacted how we're seeing the archipelago of dreams in this book. Because there's a lot of religious allegory in all three of their works. I think that the books in this series are going to follow a one book, one adventure storyline. I think there will be little things left unresolved that may come up in later books, but that for the most part they could be read out of order without the reader becoming lost. One of the future adventures has to involve Ordo Moss' wife, since she's banished to our world but is the only person who knows the secret of turning their sons back into humans if they stay out in cream form passed on. And I really want to see that get resolved. I think that Artis and Avon get together, but that she does not remain in Paralon 24/7. I think she would still spend most of her time at sea, even as High Queen. I'm pretty sure I had come across this title before, but it never really drew me in. In all honesty, I probably never would have picked it up on my own, partly because the description is not great. The writing style is also a bit formal for my preferred reading material, but once I got into the story, especially once I accidentally read the ending, I became absolutely fascinated. I really enjoyed looking at each scene and comparing it to what I know or remember of the character author's works, picking things apart and looking at it from the character's perspective, speculating on what could have inspired different aspects of the Chronicles of Narnia and Lord of the Rings was incredibly entertaining. Will I read the rest of the books in this series? Yes, for sure. I'm curious about the world and what else could happen, and there's so much amazing dialogues and quotes that was one of my favorite parts. But this is never going to be a series that I just plow through, especially since there are 8 books. This is going to be a series that I go through slowly while I read other things in between installments, which is honestly what would happen if it was in the process of being published. If you like the writing style of Here There Be Dragons and the classics turned on their heads premise, check out The Looking Glass Wars by Frank Bador. This steampunk reimagining of Alice in Wonderland follows Alice Liddell, the lost Princess Alice of Wonderland, as she restores her belief in the land and fights to reclaim her throne after being forced to face reality while growing up with the Liddells in London, following the Red Queen's coup. The other title I would recommend is technically not YA, but I feel like it has a lot of crossover appeal for sci-fi fans. The Air Affair by Jasper Fjord is a crazy whirlwind of a story taking place in Great Britain circa 1985. Time travel is routine, cloning is a reality, dodos are the resurrected pet of choice, and literature is taken very, very seriously. Thursday Next is a literary detective on the trail of the villainous Acheron Hades, who has stolen her uncle's prose portal along with the original manuscript of Jane Eyre in order to enter the novel and hold the protagonist for ransom. Because if she dies in the original, she dies in all the copies too. That is it for my review of Here There Be Dragons by James Owen. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure to vote for April's Tell Me What to Read between the 1st and the 15th of the month on the La Quinta Library's blog. Join us on Discord for teen programs, activities, and events. And like, subscribe, and ring the bell to stay up to date on what's going on for you at your library.